Okay, good morning and a very, very warm welcome and a very happy International Women's Day to everybody on the call. I'm delighted that we've got in our audience today a huge number of our clients and our colleagues. So it's great to have you all here today. Now, we may not have time to go through questions on this session. It depends on the depth and the richness of the conversation and how much time that actually takes for us. So what we will do is we will make sure that any questions that you ask are followed up and answered in the follow-up activities. So a very warm welcome, as I say, to Embracing Equity, the changing face of the female workforce. And it's an absolute pleasure to be your host today. So first of all, I would like to introduce to you our panel. And Kelly, if you could just move us on to the next slide so I can talk through the panel. That would be amazing. We are having trouble getting one of our panelists onto the call at the moment, so I think that's what's taking a moment. So I'll start to talk through the other members of the panel and then we'll come back to that in a moment. So I'm delighted to have with us today Professor Shani Orgad, who is a professor in the Department of Media and Communications at LSE and a published author. Professor Orgad's research interests include gender, feminism and media. She's won numerous teaching awards, including a 2019 LSE Teaching Excellence Prize, a 2018 LSE Excellence in Education Award, as well as the LSE Innovator Award. We're also delighted to have with us today Laura Ionescu, who has won our Adecco Group Global CEO for 1 Month programme in 2022. Laura continues to pursue her desire to serve as a spokesperson and a representative for youth and is currently studying politics and international relations as her undergraduate degree at UCL. Her dedication for social justice has seeped through during her time at the Adecco UK and Ireland CEO for 1 Month programme, and she's beyond excited that the challenges that lie ahead for her, and I'm sure there are many, at just 19 years old and entering the world of work. She's also a UN Millennium Fellow, and last year she did a social impact project battling corruption via civic education in Eastern Europe and continues to make her voice heard through her role of Journal Director at the Diplomacy Review. I'm now delighted to introduce my longtime friend and colleague, Sam Rope, who is accountable for the Adecco Group's people strategy and board sponsor for equity, diversity and inclusion. Sam is a purpose-led leader, passionate about delivering their commitment to making the future work for everyone. Having spent time both in the public and private sector, Sam recognises the increasing need for private sector employees to lead and enable social change to improve the lives of their employees and the wider community. And to complete our panel today, I have with me Abby Agana. Abby is the VP of Strategy and Transformation for the Adecco Group. She has an MBA in Strategic Management and 20 years of experience of successfully delivering customer-centred, data-driven business optimisation and change. She also sits on the board for Housing for Women as a non-executive director and as a mentor on the BT mentoring programme for BME leaders. So thank you so much for giving up your time today and being with us here. I've got to be honest, I'm slightly concerned that the screen appears to be really frozen, so I'm hoping that people can still hear what I'm saying in this session. Again, could you just raise a hand? Yeah, perfect. That's great. Good. So for our session today, we use the McKinsey Women in the Workplace report. And what that report tells us is that women leaders are leaving their roles at the highest rate we've ever seen, and ambitious young women are prepared to do the same. Women are demanding more from work, and they're leaving companies in unprecedented numbers to get it. They're switching jobs at the highest rate we've ever seen, and at higher rates than men in similar roles. And that obviously has really serious implications for organisations. If companies don't take action, they risk losing not only their women leaders, but also the next generation of women leaders. Young women are even more ambitious and place a higher premium on working in equitable, supportive and including workplaces. They're watching senior women leave for better opportunities, and they're prepared to do the same. So according to this report, there are three main reasons why this is happening. And these reasons are, the first one is women leaders want to advance, but they experience stronger headwinds than men. That's a fact. Women leaders are often overworked and under-recognised. And the third reason is women leaders are seeking a different culture in their work. So what I'd like to do is spend the body of this session really unpacking those three statements, and I'm going to hand over to our panel in order that they can do that for us. So first of all, I'm going to ask Sam Rowe, our VP of HR in the UK and Ireland, to kick off the conversation around women leaders and how they want to advance, but how they face stronger headwinds than men. Sam, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks, Helen, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm very, very proud to be representing the Adecco Group. As an organisation here in the UK and Ireland, women make up 62% of our workforce. But more importantly, we are very proud that we maintain that level of representation at all levels of seniority. Now, last week, I had the privilege of attending the graduation of our first ever cohort of Elevating Women in Leadership in collaboration with our sister brand, LHH. The feedback that we had from our female delegates was an appreciation that the challenges women face in the workplace may be different, and that there's no longer a need to defend or be embarrassed about this. In fact, they found it liberating to reflect and consider what action they need to take and what support they need on their careers journeys. So if any of those delegates are on today's webinar, well done on your successful graduation last week. So in terms of the first point that the report outlines, Helen, it talks about women facing more challenging headwinds than their male counterparts. And I'd like to give you some own personal experience. I've worked with some amazing leaders and had the privilege to work for them, both male and female, that have really advocated for me over the years. But I've also faced those microaggressions, comments like, as you get older, you won't be able to rely on your looks. And too many times I've had to justify how I'm going to manage work-life balance as a mother of two children. Now, I'd also say that in each of those instances, I've also taken them as an opportunity to educate the person that's had those conversations with me, to help them understand the impact their views have on me and on women in the workplace. So those are just some of the headwinds and challenges that we face, but I'm going to hand over to my colleague Abby to invite you to offer some reflections as well, Abby.
Thank you, Sam. I definitely share some of those experiences. And likewise, I've had some amazing senior women advocate for me and make space for me. And I know that's something we do at Adecco for younger women trying to come up. I think the additional thing when you come from a diverse background is an assumption of a lack of capability. And I think what we really want to get across when we're talking about equity is that regardless of your background, whether it's a disability or your sexuality, that doesn't actually speak to your ability to do the job. And I think those are some of the things that we then receive in microaggressions. And I've worked in quite a few organisations, some of which have amazing mission statements and diversity strategies, but it doesn't always translate into how you are received and how you are perceived. And then, unfortunately, the impact that has, I know a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, but there's also an element of people thinking you're an imposter and you having to overcompensate. And I strongly believe that that feeds into people's desire to overperform, to almost defy the perception, if that makes sense, which can also lead to burnout, because we want to almost work twice as hard to overcome the perception that either because you're a woman or you're a woman of colour or you're disabled, that you cannot do the job, and the two things are not interlinked. And I think that's why this year's theme around equity is so important, because it's about how we level that playing field so that everybody is able to be their best selves and be their authentic selves. But I've certainly received many of those microaggressions, and as you know, Sam, they're so intangible, aren't they? It's so hard to go to your boss and say, actually, I have this feeling. And that's why I think organisational culture is so important. So, and that's one of the things I love about Adecco, because, you know, you walk the talk. So it's not only, yes, you're doing great things in this space, but actually you feel it from the people that work in the organisation. And coming into an organisation where you are from a diverse background, that's how you make the judgment. You know, it's not on the things that you read on the website, it's how you feel in that space.
Absolutely. And I think hold that thought on overworking and being under-recognised, because that's certainly something that we're going to talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes as well. So inviting our external speaker, and indeed a professor and a award-winning author and commentator on this point, could you share your observations in terms of the different headwinds that maybe women face in the workplace?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure, and I want to wish everybody a happy but also angry International Women's Day. Because having researched the issue of women in the workforce for the last decade, having read this morning news, I'm very angry, and I hope and I think we should all be, and channel it into, you know, a political energy for change and for happiness. Now, my own research looked at women who left the workforce, women in senior positions, accountants, engineers, lawyers, senior managers across very different sectors, and particularly women who left the workforce in a context of having children. And I certainly kind of, you know, want to echo, and my own research corroborates the first part of the McKinsey report about women leaders wanting to advance. Women have very similar desires, even as Abby said, extra desire to kind of make it and to succeed and progress in their career. But I think, to me, the idea that women are facing headwinds is somewhat of a euphemism. It's an understatement. And while I do recognize, and a lot of the women I interviewed spoke about similar microaggressions, these are the manifestation of a systemic, you know, culture and systemic failures. And the women I interviewed and the data that I've reviewed for many, many years indicated that women face systemic structures and cultures that prevent their progress, or at least do not fully and properly support them. And ultimately, you know, the idea that women leaders want to advance, even this is being often curbed, because many of the women I interviewed, because of facing these systemic structures that felt that they're stacked against them, sometimes decided that actually maybe I'm not going to go for it. So they even, you know, they didn't want it, not because they originally didn't want it. You know, we know all, but I think we need to be reminded. Only today, a new research shows that the pay gap between educated mothers and fathers is greater now than at the end of the 70s. That is shocking. And so microaggressions are, you know, manifestation of much, much deeper problem, despite changes that perhaps have been accelerated by the pandemic in relation to workplaces flexibility. Many workplaces, perhaps not the Adecco group, continue to prioritize presence. You know, women, all employees' presence over quality and overcome something that has comes at the expense of women. And women still continue to be excluded from significant decision-making moments, particularly around when they become pregnant, but certainly not just around motherhood. So I think, you know, there are lots of practical measures that are very, very welcome, but as long as we we must also think systemically about how workplaces need to be designed to support equality. And we will get to the long hour culture, so I'm not going to touch on it, but it is something that is fundamental. But I just want to, mention one of the things that the report mentions is under the first kind of heading. They mentioned the example of being a parent playing a role in women being denied promotion. And that's given as an example of women's experiences and kind of, obstacles and microaggression. But that is often to do with a systemic problem of overwork cultures, that are utterly incompatible with being a parent. So I want to kind of, reframe headwinds as actually a failing system rather than just a wind that's blowing in our face and might change its course.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I love the energy and the challenge that you're bringing to the room. I think that's great. Thank you very much. And I certainly remember having had my first child, having a conversation with my boss at the time, who told me that they had changed my job because I wouldn't want to travel anymore. I was like, oh. How do you know that? Wasn't aware that that was an issue for me. And that person genuinely, trust me, they genuinely thought they were doing me a favour. And so, to some extent, they were shocked when I had the reaction that I had. But I suppose that's a demonstration of just how systemic and how deep rooted it is in some people's psyches. So, Laura, you're entering into the workplace and have already kind of set your stall out as an activist and a believer for equity. It'd be interesting to see if any of the observations that we've shared you've witnessed during your journey so far.
Yes, no, definitely. I think I can sort of understand where everybody's coming from, and I've seen it in action, unfortunately, in many types of organizations throughout like internships and things like that. But I do believe that this is true from an expression point of view as well. So there's a reticence to speak up in things like meetings or be assertive with colleagues or senior management because of fear of being wrong. So I think that there's a more subtle element to it, that element of not being sure of your own voice, for example, and being concerned about overshadowing others, which is definitely present in women more than in men. We see that all the time where women refuse to speak up, even though they believe that whatever's happening to them is wrong. And we see this in schools and universities too, so that's where I'm coming from. And I believe the report outlines that I think 1 in 3 women aged 20 to 30 from lower socioeconomic groups are not comfortable in challenging opinions in the workplace at all. So it's not only about what occurs in the workforce that makes women's path through work more difficult, but it's also about women's challenges to fight back against these discrepancies and difficulties. So I think there's that more subtle layer that I think I've witnessed a bit more, and I've had colleagues and friends tell me about. So, for example, as Abby said, things such as microaggression are so intangible most of the time, and the difficulty in being heard and expressing these in an attempt at solving them is more challenging than anything. And I think for me, I also wanted to mention the pay gap, and unequal pay is one of the most frustrating things. The fact that in the 21st century, we still have a 17% pay gap worldwide is heartbreaking. My work should be valued as much as the man's next to me. And I grew up by my mother's side, has worked in multiple executive roles for a long time now, and I was raised with her explaining to me these seemingly inherent parent pay gaps limitations. And I've always mirrored her frustrations. So especially now that I'm entering the workforce, I think I'm gonna start to feel these more first-handedly.
That's great, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And that's just really outlines some of the really challenging headwinds that, women can face in the workplace, and particularly the one around, Sam alluded to about changing your job just because you've now got children, and it's just so it just makes you feel less worthy and less part of something, and it is really, really damaging. So thank you for that. I'd like to come on to our next point now, which is that women leaders tend to be overworked and under-recognised. And I wonder who would like to kick that that particular debate off. And that is more around taking on additional responsibility, whether that be work related or more social related within the workplace, or more externally that can impact on working life as well. Abby, would you like to take that?
Thanks, Helen. Yes, I think essentially from and all as you outlined in my intro, I do a lot of mentoring, and specifically of women wanting to move into leadership. And what tends to happen is their careers kind of go horizontally as opposed to vertically. So their remit gets broader, whether they're picking up extra activities to drive change in the organisation. Maybe it's part of the D&I initiative, or just taking key roles in focus groups and things like that. And then additionally doing things outside, so sitting on boards and things of that nature, again, to prove and to kind of show their worth. And what that does is, it takes them away from, as Lara was saying, some of the strategic conversations they may not be privy to, because they're actually quite downwardly focused. And it's something that I've noticed also when I interview women. They speak very much about the pastoral care and how they're taking care of their colleagues and how they're taking care of their team, which is all good stuff. But what's different with men is that they're very upwardly focused. So they'll do more of that networking, making sure that they're in the spaces where the strategic conversations happen. So ultimately, women end up doing a vast amount that isn't necessarily furthering them and giving them the visibility. There's also the piece of, again, to Lara's point, of not wanting to be seen as a problem, not wanting to complain, kind of consuming your own smoke in terms of childcare and things that you have to do. I mean, I can confess quite early in my career, I was a young mum, and I didn't tell probably my first 2 employers that I had a child, because I didn't want to be judged on that basis. So you're consuming your own smoke, making the necessary arrangements so that you can work as long as your peers, but also doing the other bits in terms of taking care of the team and doing the additional pieces, which is why sometimes a lot of that stuff goes below the radar. And actually, from a business perspective, sometimes it doesn't make sense to kind of remove that person because they're doing so much. And when you're thinking about promoting them, you potentially have to replace them with 2 or 3 people when you look at what they're actually doing. So they're a safe pair of hands at quite a junior level. And these are conversations I've had at a senior level in terms of why people aren't moving forward. And it's like, well, they're fine there and they've got other responsibilities that, to Sam's point, there's an assumption made that actually they don't want to move forward. And then we get burnout. We get to a point where actually we can't spin all of those plates along with our outside commitments, and there's that lack of visibility, as the report says, in terms of being under recognised, and it's not due to lack of effort.
And I think it's that likability factor, isn't it? You take on more because you don't want to disappoint people and you want them to like you for doing more, but that's not necessarily the right answer at all. So, Shani, could I just bring you in on that point?
Yes, I want to jump in, first of all, just to echo what Abby said through the voices of the women I interviewed. And I think it's so telling, Abby, that you shared this. This was shared by many of the women, the very fact, hiding the fact that they had a child. It's, it sounds completely absurd, but it's still so common. And this is telling a lot about, not about a problem of us individually as women, but about the structures and the cultures within which we work, which encourage us explicitly or implicitly to hide such a thing. To me, perhaps the most important finding in this McKinsey report is sadly buried in somewhere in the middle. And that's the one page that says that women are not just overworked at work, but that they're also overworked at home. I was glad to see it. I was saddened to see it yet again as a one-page, almost kind of appendix type, because if we want to tackle inequality at the workplace, we cannot do it without thinking about inequality and oppression in other spheres. And that echoes also what Laura said before. The two are really interconnected, and we know research and after research shows that women continue to shoulder the unpaid labor of caring, not just for children, but for all the elderly. Yeah, so this kind of sandwich idea. The research kind of recent figures from Pregnant Then Screwed shows that 54% of women are having to work fewer hours because of childcare costs, because of the soaring childcare costs. So it's not just, to go back to the report, it's not just that women are also overworked. The fact that they are overworked at home is inseparably connected to the fact that they're overworked at home. And I think that why workplaces can do so much about what's going on at home. I think at a collective level, workplaces have huge responsibility to mobilize in relation to childcare costs, in relation to the whole perception of caring and other issues. I also want to say that the report again raises the issue of flexibility as very important and working from home. But again, it says remote and hybrid work are game-changing for women. No, they are game-changing for everybody. And so long as flexibility and work-life balance are continued to be framed as women's issue, the implication is that women need this kind of flexibility because guess what? They are the carers. Yeah, that's the inherent implicit assumptions there. And I want to give two quick examples from the kind of interviews I've conducted. One was, and that was repeated, that even when, and I spoke mainly, not just exclusively, but mainly with women who were in heterosexual relationship or married, and their husbands worked in high-powered, very, very demanding careers. Even when the men got more flexible kind of working conditions and worked at home, they would rarely contribute more to housework and childcare. There was one story of a woman who told me, yes, my husband works more from home, but he has literally put a sign on his home office, do not disturb for me and the children. So I think, flexibility is a huge issue, but it's an issue for all employees. And it really concerns me and troubles me that it continues to be framed as a woman's issue and as something that only women need. The other thing I want to say is that many of the women I interviewed, which again were women leaders in various careers, ultimately scaled back and ultimately left the workplace, sometimes not because they didn't have flexible work arrangements. Sometimes the working conditions in terms of working hours were quite good at their, they had generous and supportive employers, but it was their husbands' workplaces that made it impossible for them ultimately and sacrifice. So I had a case of a senior lawyer who actually managed to get really supportive package of, flex work and so on. But her husband worked in a very high demanding career that practically meant he didn't come home. He came every night at 10:30 in the night and left before the children woke up. That wasn't unusual. And so she ultimately kind of bit the bullet and decided that she, even though she had the flexibility, it was still unsustainable within these conditions. So I really think we need to shift the kind of the overwork culture is a pandemic in itself. And there were lots of hopes that the COVID-19 pandemic would introduce some changes, and I know it has, but we have uneven data. It seems, however, that there's a slight backlash in many workplaces where actually there's kind of return to presentism, and there's lots of stigma now about working from home. There's a new term, working from home stigma, which again affects women more than men. So yes, for recognition, yes, for changing work cultures, but not just for women.
And it strikes me that it's not just about changing your job. You might have to change your spouse if you're not getting the support at home to help you be the best version of yourself too. And I certainly know that I'm joking about it, but I certainly know that my husband and I, have had the conversation about who will do what from a home perspective, and we've never subscribed to the pink jobs and the blue jobs, as I often hear on the rugby pitch on a Sunday morning. I'll hear blokes say, well, that's a pink job, I don't do that, or that's a blue job. So taking the bins out is a blue job, but looking after the kids and cooking is a pink job. I mean, the fact that you still hear this stuff in today's society is unbelievable. But me and my husband had to have a very grown-up conversation about, what work-life balance looks like for us both, because to your point, Shani, when he was traveling in, he was reading a book, he was getting through some brilliant books. When he was going in, he was buying brilliant bikes from the internet because he'd researched them for hours on end. When I was traveling and I was doing my emails and trying to get some food on the online shop to make sure that we could all eat at the weekend. So that prioritization of the wider impact that we have is not just a work thing, it's a life thing as well. So I think, as work transitions into lifetime and we're thinking differently about the world of work, we need to think about our support networks around us as well. And I certainly know that, I've had two amazing, they happen to be female, but female child minders in my life. And without them, I would not be where I am today, without the support and the help that they provided to me. So not quite at that stage in your life yet, Laura, but an interesting discussion about that, about the roles both at work and at home as well. I wonder if you could share your reflections for us.
Yes, definitely. So as I think was mentioned before, the report says that 43% of women leaders are burnout compared to 31% of men. So that there's a discrepancy there already. But this isn't only because of the seemingly greater amount of work that you need to do in the first place to be recognized, but also because of having to battle your way through, as everybody's been talking about here. And as an example, the McKinsey report stated that D&I is so crucial for companies. However, 40% of women leaders say that their D&I work isn't even acknowledged in performance reviews. So I'm sure, Helen, you have more firsthand experience with this, but it is infuriating to be fighting for our roles within the workforce in the first place. It must be even more infuriating for these very efforts to not even be recognized beyond that. And I do believe that, obviously, as a representative, I guess, of youth coming into the workforce, there are nowadays more barriers than ever to youth work opportunities. And these are coupled with challenges we still need to face simply because of being women. There's a significant lack of entry-level jobs. And there's a lot of ineffective labor market information floating around. So for youth everywhere, it has become seemingly impossible to get roles, with acceptance level being at all-time lows, the lowest of which range from 0.0001% at the most competitive companies. And every student is experiencing this at the moment. People are applying to 50 to 100 internship and graduation schemes to only get back 3 to 4 offers. So it's become more difficult than ever for youth to enter the workforce, and we can only imagine the combined limitations placed on women because of that. Youth is being overworked even before entering the workforce. And as women, we have to deal with further limitations, and that appears exhausting. I think one little example I wanted to mention was also something like office temperatures. It might not necessarily be directly linked to overworking, but it's an inherent part of the corporate world nowadays where office temperatures are incredibly low. And even things like that, which might not appear as great obstacles to overcome, men wear suits to work, women don't usually do. And even things like that appear as small obstacles that might not seem to have a great impact on women's experience in the workforce, but they do. So yeah, I just wanted to share that as well.
Thank you for that, Laura. And I think that is really a couple of points that you made there about the EDI space. And I am really lucky that, I am in that percentage where it absolutely is recognised, the work, but there is an awful lot of work goes into that. And for people in other organisations, if that isn't recognised, that's a real challenge. And whilst people do it because they're passionate about it, it can that passion soon wears off almost if there is no, it just feels like a lot more work. So it's really important that that recognition is in place. And you mentioned about youth opportunities as well. We've seen a real spike in our applications for CEO for 1 month so far this year, and I think that is testament to that opportunity. There is a real scarcity of opportunity for people entering the world of work, so that plays out in, you know, if there is an opportunity and it's accessible and it's easy to access, and the benchmark is not low once you get through the process, but to get into the program, it's a very equitable playing field to start through that process. So I think that's why we've seen a real spike in applications this year. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. So I'm just going to move us on now to the final point that we wanted to talk about today, which is a really interesting one, and I think one that we can probably really delve quite deeply into and talk quite a lot about. So women leaders are seeking a different culture of work, and I think in an organisation where we have experienced some real culture change over the last 18 months, it's a really good starting point. So I'm going to hand over to Sam to really kick off that conversation about women leaders who are seeking a different culture of work.
Yeah, I found this one interesting because I don't know if women leaders are seeking a different culture or whether they're more comfortable talking about it. So I think I've always seen that desire and that passion to work for a purpose-led and inclusive organisation. But I think what was once considered soft skills, there is a transition now to seeing how important that those skills are in the workplace. So I think it's shifted the dialogue and shifted the mindset. I also think that, you know, a lot has happened in the last few years in terms of equity, diversity and inclusion. Out of some pretty horrific circumstances, we now find ourselves in a place where it is absolutely front and centre to have the discussion. So I think I don't necessarily think that they have changed their approach. I just feel from the conversations that I have with senior leaders that they're more comfortable engaging in the dialogue and having a challenging conversation around culture and inclusion now. So I don't know whether that's been borne out of any of the research that you've done, Shani.
Yes, I think you're right, Sam. Partly women are voicing more of these, but I think also the reason that women particularly are interested in changing work cultures is because the work cultures, as in their existing form, don't work for them, and they work much better for men. So that's again back to the systemic issue. You know, I wanted to speak to two particular things that I found in my research. On the one hand, I completely agree with you, Sam. There have been, you know, significant strides have been made. We do live in a very different era in terms of, you know, even the notion of DEI or EDI, whatever, you know, present is a huge progress and awareness raising, and kind of people and committees and measurement kind of invested in it. I think oftentimes, and that goes back also to something Abby said earlier, there's a gap between the investment in these programs and structures and EDI champions and mentorships and allyships programs, all of which are really, really positive, and the everyday practices that still fall behind. And I want to give two examples. One is, and I think it's something that might resonate with a lot of our audiences. I know it resonates with me and many of my colleagues, but that's something I've heard time and again from a lot of my interviewees. Some of whom worked in, again, quite supportive workplaces. And one example that really stood out, but again was very representative, was a woman who was a senior marketing manager for she worked in that workplace for 17 years. She describes it as her family. Yeah, she felt at home. She was promoted. And the turning point for her was when she had her second child, and her second child in particular had some medical condition that required her to go for monthly NHS, you know, appointments that you can't choose. You just get the letter, that's when your appointment is. And so she informed her female boss about it. Everybody knew about it, that once a month you know, she couldn't really, she had no control. And again, it goes also to the problems within her marital relationship and the inequality there, where she was always the ones who did, who took the child to the hospital. But it so happened that one of these times clashed with a very important clients meeting. And she did say, I will have to leave early, I'm afraid, because I need to take my child to this appointment. And so the moment arrived, and she had that meeting with the client. And you know, this moment where you feel really conspicuous and you stand up and you tiptoe outside the room. And this is an EDI issue. So again, all the EDI champions and programs were there, but everybody gave her this look. And later on, implicitly in her appraisal, she did not get a promotion because she was criticized specifically for that meeting, for her lack of commitment, you know, and for her inappropriate conduct. You know, she took them to tribunal and won and so on. That's a very particular story. But I'm giving this story because, you know, a lot of these EDI issues and changing work cultures and seeking a different work cultures it's really important to think about them within institutional forms, such as training further, but also through these kind of everyday, how do you create a culture where it's okay for an employee, man or woman or non-binary, leaving a meeting early because they have a life outside the work, and it doesn't have to be even related to parenting. And the second thing I wanted to say about EDI, and that goes back to that, you know, Sam, you were talking about that conversation you had with your husband. And one of the things I found in many of the interviews I did with women is that this conversation never happened, neither with their husbands nor with their workplaces. And crucially, I think thinking a different work cultures is a work culture where we can talk about these things, yeah, where, and particularly at key moments, not just on International Women's Day. The women I interviewed, really their workplaces have fallen silent in some of the key moments where gender equality can be kind of achieved and enhanced. And the moments where, when they announced their pregnancy, and that was congratulations, silence, yeah. Partly because of a legal framework, some employers are very, very cautious about what to say and what not, but that has resulted often in saying nothing. And then upon their return to workplace, silence, the best was kind of sending them into some confidence building program. You know, this assumption I have a lot to say about because I wrote the whole different book, which is called Confidence Culture, which is a critique of this idea that we somehow born lacking confidence, and the solution to gender equality is to send us on confidence training programs. But and later in life, and I know Helen will have much more to say about it, the conversations around menopause, you know, serious moments in women's lives that are not generic, it would differ from one woman to another. Where workplaces are still falling silent. And I think, you know, creating a culture where these conversations are being had without shame and not in the context that I'm asking for a favor. Yeah, again, this is part of the culture, I think is a key kind of route to enhancing EDI and beyond EDI mentors, beyond all these things that I don't want to dismiss are important, but they differ also in quality.
Thanks. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. I'm trying to order them in my mind. I think it's around the psychological safety piece. I think it's around, you know, we've spoken a lot about culture, but if we want people to be able to be their authentic selves and to speak up, we have to feel like we're in safe spaces, and not just in forums and, you know, on days like this, but throughout the organisation. And what that means is that we need an environment and colleagues who understand that, because you always have this subculture, don't you? And I think the point that was just made around that lady leaving that meeting, you know, everything could have been signed off. It's been above board. They knew that she was leaving, but then you get those kind of snide comments like part-timer, not, you know, those kind of things. And that we need zero tolerance on that. So And it goes right across the ED&I spectrum, because, you know, even with the best will in the world, if your other colleagues don't get it, and I think that the other side of that coin is, let's reset what good looks like. So Sam's always talking about being more outcome focused. So it's not about presenteeism. It's about actually, are you doing your job and being productive? Now, we all know on this call that, you know, we'll work, we might do something with the kids, and then we log on again in the evening. So we're always doing our work, but it might not be in a linear fashion. And if an organisation is saying that actually linear is good, and anything that veers away from that, that is actually toxic. Because that, you know, the other end of that spectrum is, you know, this archetype of a person is good, and anything else that veers away from that, it's a problem. You know, so we have to have these uncomfortable conversations. And I think one of the things that came out of COVID, with us all being at home and our kids popping up to the screen and things like that, sorry, I think is that it humanized us. And we shouldn't lose that.
Yeah.
We should feel comfortable to have these conversations without fear of stigma. But as leaders, we have to stamp on it when we see it, even if it's coming from our most high performing members of the team. If they are creating a negative atmosphere in any way, shape or form, that taints the whole organisation. And I think we talk about culture a lot, but it's so nebulous, isn't it? But really it is the sum of all parts in terms of what we all think good looks like and what we're going to accept and what we're not. So it is about just being firmer. And one of the things I loved about this report is the fact that young people, young women, are less tolerant. And that shows an evolution of the women's movement, doesn't it? We're less tolerant than our mums were. They're less tolerant than us. And as the mother of a 31-year-old, I know she has very clear demands in terms of what she expects from an organisation and a job, and, you know, and these types of things. And that's excellent. And actually, we can learn from them in terms of being a bit braver. Because as I said before, there is still a bit of us that's like, don't want to make a problem, don't want to cause a scene, just want to be seen the same as. But actually, we're different, and that's okay. So to the point around menopause, you know, all of these things that have been kind of beneath the surface, that we've just, as I say, consumed our own smoke, whether it's a miscarriage and then you just come to work the next day because you don't want to, you know, that what does this do to our mental health and our well-being? Like, we're just eroding ourselves for fear of just speaking up.
Absolutely. And when somebody said that phrase part-timer, then I remember how that made me feel when years and years ago, it's a long time since I worked part-time, but I can remember how it made me feel inside. It's a horrible feeling. And you naturally think, I've got to defend that. I've got to do more. I've got to prove that I can do more in the time that I've got. And it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. Absolutely. So I'm just going to hand over, thank you for that. I'm just going to hand over to Laura for the last few minutes to say, what do you expect? And Abby quite rightly said that different generations have different expectations, and that has evolved over time for sure. So it really seems fitting to ask you that, from you and your peers, what is it that you expect moving forward?
Yeah, I actually think that what I want and what my peers want is reflected by the report. So it says that 58% of women under 30 say advancement has become more important than ever. And this is part of the culture change that you, Helen, were mentioning earlier. And also 44% of women say that their manager regularly doesn't show interest in their career. And these are the two elements that I think for me are key, and they come to a clash head to head. More young women than ever want advancement opportunities earlier in their careers. But at the same time, more young women than ever want support and acknowledgement of their efforts to be able to advance further. And as we've discussed so far, that doesn't necessarily happen. And as per McKinsey, for every 100 women that are promoted to managerial positions, only 85% are promoted. So for me, these things are important, but the discussion around women empowerment in the workforce is not only about the conditions in which we work, but also the barriers that we have to progression. And I think these stats really accentuated that. So as I enter the workforce, I'm ambitiously looking forward to growth opportunities, as many young women in similar situations to myself are. But the environment in which we're being thrown to is, as we've said, paying less, is acknowledging us less, and it's putting us in uncomfortable situations that not everybody feels comfortable enough to speak their way out of. So I think those are like, that's the irony that we sort of need to balance a little bit. And at the end of the day, it is a representation thing. The Fortune's 2021 list of CEOs sees only 41 female executives making the list out of 500 companies that are listed. And so when women look ahead, I know that's like an extreme example, but when women look ahead of them in the workforce, they don't see the same far-reaching trajectory as men. And that should radically change. We live in a world where companies should adapt the workplace to be just as inclusive of women as they are of men by providing the flexibility or the maternity support systems or the support in general that everybody here has been talking about.
Thank you, and thank you for those words, Laura, and I completely agree with what you're saying. But one thing that really stood out for me there is that, you know, not everybody has the confidence to speak out, and I think it's fair to say that we're all confident women on this session today, so thank you for that. But I think it's really important that we either find a way to support others and give them that confidence, or we become we support them, we advocate for them, and we make sure that that equity is there for all women, not just the ones who've got the confidence to speak out. So thank you. Thank you. There are many challenges there that we unpacked, and I think we could probably go another hour and unpack a whole load more. But it's really important to look at how we can make an impact and influence, and that confidence to speak up for others, I think, is really, really important. I'd like to thank our panel for today for their thoughts and inspiration on International Women's Day, and I'd like to thank our audience as well. And I have noticed that we have had a real teams challenge in this session. We have had a number of people who haven't been able to access it, so I will do something to rectify that very, very shortly. We will get this recording out to everybody who signed up to join the session today, and I plan to, if the guests are available, I plan to rerun the session in the very near future for a broader audience. So I hope that helps. Just one of those horrific experiences and challenges that I probably don't want to live through again for I feel like I've aged 10 years in the last hour. So my apologies for that. We will respond to any questions. We'll send you the link. We absolutely appreciate your feedback and interest in our events, and until the next time we host one, I hope you have a wonderful rest of International Women's Day, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. Bye everybody.
Thank you very much.